All right, I am back with another video of my personal research project. So I want to connect these videos. And so you'll notice at the end of every video, I'll say like, what's next? So what is the thing that I'm researching next? And then after the video following, I'll in there and kind of tie this video to this one, to that one. So saying all of that just kind of clunkily, walk with me. This is my plan. So in the last video, what I said I wanted to focus on next was I wanted to dig more into pedagogy and look for more examples of different types of pedagogy. So I did that and discovered that the four types of pedagogy that we did cover in the last video, which was these. Let's scroll back here, which was behaviorist, constructivist, social constructivist, and then liberationist. These are the types. When I started to do more poking around, I realized that a lot of when they kind of delve deeper into pedagogy, they're talking more about like learning styles, how to connect with students, how to deliver the information, which can also help with measurement and all of that. So with that and that discovery, I decided to pivot, or not pivot, but move down my research plan, and kind of leave pedagogy here and move on to what is next. But before I do, I do want to talk about the liberationist pedagogy and the pedagogy of the oppressed. So I actually did get that book by Paulo Freire. I also looked up how to properly pronounce the author's name because I wanted to do it justice and also just say it correctly. And so that book I'm currently listening to it on, I'm currently listening to the audiobook, but it's going to take me some time, mainly because it's a very dense book. Like the language is very high level language. It's a lot of complex thought just kind of strung together. And so it's definitely something that I think I would need to process multiple times in different ways as I'm just kind of taking it on. So this is just my first pass at it, doing it audiobook style. And I can definitely see myself getting a hard copy so I can like highlight things because I can see it as a great reference tool, as well. But with that being said, let's go to that's kind of how I'm ending. So that was the wrap up of the last video. And so now I want to get into this video, which is what is andragogy? So this is the topic that I was researching on my next phase of research. And just for FYI purposes, I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, but I have a plan, and I will kind of speak to where I'm wanting, like what I am looking into. The question that I would like to ultimately answer ties into learning and development and adult learning, but I want to start with the basics. So let's start with what is andragogy. So, andragogy means the understanding of science and practice of adult learning. Now, in my research, I found the Cornerstone University blog. I use theirs. I'm trying to focus on like organizations that are education focused, because they have a they benefit from sharing and explaining this information because it provides understanding about how they're teaching students when people take the courses and enroll there. And so because I think they have a vested interest in sharing information that is correct and accurate, that they will do as such. And so I found the Cornerstone University blog. So that's my reasoning for the way that I'm doing the research. And on the blog, I learned that the term andragogy was actually coined in 1833 by a German teacher named Alexander Knapp. And he came up with this term because he was trying to categorize and describe Plato's theory of education. However, when you really do a deep dive into research, you'll actually find that the term andragogy is more closely associated with Malcolm Knowles, who was an educator, for, I'm like, why does my note look weird? I believe it was in like the 1940s. Let me confirm that date and then I will I'm going to move on, but I'm also about to look up that date really quickly. Um, and so let me just type that in. And it's funny. I don't know. Those of the Beyonce fans, the Beehive, may find it funny. I keep trying to call Malcolm Knowles Matthew Knowles. I don't know. I know why, but it's funny. So, the theory of andragogy, I think he kind of began to use it. Okay, he further developed the theory of andragogy in the 1970s. So it is a very old term, and it's not a brand new, point of view and perspective, but it got further fleshed out by Malcolm Knowles. And so that's where, if you were to look up andragogy, you would find like Malcolm Knowles, theories, and they were all methodologies and things they would reference Malcolm Knowles. And so according to Malcolm Knowles, because he kind of leaned into andragogy, according to Malcolm Knowles, adult learning had to be self-driven. So unlike pedagogy, pedagogy is teacher-centric. So it's all about the teacher essentially pouring knowledge into the learners in various ways, but that's what pedagogy is. Well, with andragogy, now we're dealing with adults, and so you have to allow room and space for them to drive their own learning. So it's important that, and so that's really the shift from pedagogy to andragogy. You have to explain to adults why they are learning because they have to guide their learning process. And I'm not sure if that is kind of just shaped by society, as all people who are deemed children or youth are determined to be naive to things, because they just haven't experienced them necessarily. That's kind of the assumption. Whereas adults are determined, are like, well, you are more mature, and so you need to be motivated to be here. Like you need to have a why. And that's kind of the root. And that's just a general undercurrent of andragogy. Now, while andragogy is kind of a general idea or concept, whereas pedagogy has different types. With andragogy, we have the different principles of andragogy. So these are the things that make up andragogy that kind of come into practice when you're thinking about andragogy. So the first one is that adults need to be involved in the planning and evaluation of their instruction, which kind of helps with the self-motivated. If you engage them into the planning of it, then they'll be motivated to do it. With andragogy, experience provides the basis for the learning activities, including mistakes. So because adults have lived experience, that lived experience is a foundation for the learning. And so it should be kept in mind. You can't assume that you're pouring into an empty cup, because you're not. Adults are most interested in learning subjects that have immediate relevance and impact to their job or personal life. So if you can't find the why, if you can't make it their why connect with the why of the learning, they won't do it. And then the last one is that adult learning is problem centered rather than content oriented. And so this list was quoted, this was cited by Kearsley from 2010 in a publication about andragogy, in the article that I pulled from the e-learning industry website, where they were talking about adult learning theory, andragogy. So that's where these principles came from. And I looked in a couple of other places and they also had these principles. So I think that these are pretty prevailing principles of andragogy and things to keep in mind when you are wanting to implement learning and do it under the guidance of andragogy. Now, here is what I learned. So what did I learn as I'm connecting these dots? So one, I learned that andragogy, and I just said this, unlike pedagogy, is a singular concept, whereas pedagogy there are different types of pedagogy, so it's more of a bucket concept. Andragogy is, it's adult learning. And while the principles of andragogy make perfect sense, as someone who has taught, college students who are kind of like they're coming from pedagogy, going into andragogy as the adult learners, but I've also facilitated and taught training courses to adults. And so the principles make perfect sense. These are all things that I've had to keep in mind and think about when creating courses to make sure that the people who are taking the training are engaged and learn. However, as I just mentioned that I teach college students, I feel like there's a missing link between pedagogy and andragogy because when you think about pedagogy, you think K through 12. Usually when you're reading articles about pedagogy, that's what they're talking about, K through 12 learners. But then when you think of andragogy, you think of adult learners. But there's a group in the middle here that really doesn't fall into either one of those categories necessarily, and that is college students or entry-level workers, which are people who are new to the workforce. And so they are kind of transitioning, or people who are going to college, kind of extending their education, but again, new to adult learning theories because they have been steeped in pedagogy from K through 12. And so how is it that you can connect those dots, because these are two different approaches to learning, and essentially you just kind of toss the students, like they go from one bucket of learning into another bucket of learning, or as I've learned and discovered, having created courses at the college level, it's really just a lot of pedagogy. So you can also say that college is an extension of the K through 12 pedagogy, but even then you go from pedagogy to andragogy, because once you start taking training courses and you're learning at work, it's andragogy. And so how do you bridge the gap? How do you take learners who have been steeped in one type of learning to now being exposed to a different type of learning and ensure that they get the information? What does that look like? And so that's what's next. So I want to look into what can bridge pedagogy and andragogy. Now, I started having this conversation with a friend of mine who is a facilitator, who works as a facilitator more so than I do. I want to do more facilitation work, but I'm currently I'm an instructor and I do training, but like he does a lot more facilitation. So of course I'm sure often thinking like, what are some ways that I can engage my students, my learners, the people who come to take my workshops, and make sure that they get the information, but also have a time that they feel like their time was spent in value by taking my trainings. So I think figuring out the bridge will be helpful. Now, like as I was saying, in a conversation with him, he mentioned that he had kind of looked up, because I mentioned about wanting to know if there was a bridge, and he had looked up and found out that there was, and it's called pedagogy. So now that's my next thing, is what can bridge pedagogy and andragogy. So of course I'm going to start with pedagogy, but I'm also going to look at what are some other ways, like what are some recommendations, what are some theories, what are some methodologies that are used to essentially begin to prepare students who are not working in the workforce in the same way, like maybe they're doing, hourly work, but they're not necessarily on their career path just yet. Because I know students have jobs, so I'm not saying that they don't, but in those jobs, you're often like learning a task and you do the task, but you may not be getting like professional development. Your employer may not be looking for ways to upskill you because the role that you play is a role that's, in this specific area, and you do this specific task. Versus once you have gotten onto like your career path, now you are looking for like upskilling, professional development, skills, all of that. What does that process look like? What are those methodologies? So I'm going to research them and see what I can find, because this is taking me down, again, as I said initially a while ago, this is taking me on a path of, that's kind of the question that I'm looking to answer. Like, that's one of the questions. How can you prepare college students for the workforce and the way that they're going to be taught information once they have started working when you're teaching them in college? Is the answer to that pedagogy and figuring out some way to incorporate pedagogy? Is there another answer? That's what I'm looking for in my next research. So thanks for watching my video. If you have, thoughts, questions, insight, research, please feel free to share it in the comments. I want to keep the conversation about this as fact-based as possible so that we can find the information and, back up what we're talking about. But also, this is just giving me more stuff to research. So if you can come with some books, articles, PDFs, websites that talk about the things that you want to talk about, if you want to make a specific point, please share it below. Otherwise, I'm going to go because my kitty just yowled. And so I think that's my cue to stop this and do some more research. So I will see you next time.